Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to my second video in the X-Men review series. Today, we are talking about X2, X-Men United. This one was directed by Bryan Singer, same director as the first movie, again for 20th Century Fox Studios. And we pick up shortly after the events of the first film, where the X-Men have now they've defeated Magneto, but of course there is a new villain out there, and his name is William Stryker. He leads a special part of the government, special ops of his own, and he preaches, or he not preaches, but pleads with the president to allow him to investigate the Xavier School for the Gifted to find out what exactly they're doing there, because he has taken surveillance and he had videos and photographs and videos of the X-Jet coming out from the school from when they went to Liberty Island in the first film. So much of the same crew is back. Wolverine returns after going to Canada to try to find out something about his past, and he has no luck. And that's a pretty good summary. Most of you have probably already seen this movie. I probably don't have to tell you, but we will touch on some spoilers. I think the movie's been out now for, 17 years. So I think if any of you have seen it, if you're probably watching this video, you probably watched it and you have an opinion on it, or I don't know. If you haven't watched it, I guess I'll have to leave you there, because that's where, overall, I think this is very good. I really like this entry into the franchise. It really showed the potential of what was possible. And again, it was kind of nervous after you watch when you go back and watch them and start with the first movie. As a fresh viewer, you might be like, whoa, I don't know if I'm quite in for this. Well, trust me, X2 will get you on board with it. And I think this movie, again, as I said, it really it has a good story, and they had a lot more money to work with on this one. They had an increased budget, and they had a good performance from the first movie in the summer of 2000. So it was really cool to see that. I did make it into theaters to see this film. I remember being really excited when it came out, and it was a really good movie, good adventure. It still holds up as I watch these in 2020, almost 17 years later. And we see again a great cast return. We have good performances again from Hugh Jackman, Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen as returning as Professor X and Magneto. Again, they are lifelong roles. I think they'll always be remembered for those roles. And then you have Hugh Jackman, of course, always going to be known as Wolverine. But you have the rest of this, such a great cast of characters. We have Halle Berry as Storm, James Marsden as Cyclops. You have Rebecca Ramjan Stamos as Mystique. Brian Cox plays Stryker. Alan Cumming plays the new character, Nightcrawler. And you got Sean Ashmore has more to do with Bobby Drake or Iceman. Rogue is played by Anna Paquin. And then they have some new characters. Aaron Stanford plays Pyro, and then Daniel Cudmore plays Peter Rasputin, or Colossus, which we don't really see much screen time of. But I just want to highlight just what a great cast and good performances all the way around. I would argue. The positives of this movie, well, the opening scene, or the opening in this movie is so great. It's legendary. I still hear people on other various shows mention it from time to time. It was just such a cool introduction to the character Nightcrawler and his ability, and it was also a good event to show to lead to, basically a prologue into the main story. An attack on the president by a mutant would definitely set fears at a pretty high rate, and it really showed the mutant movement that there were. It kind of resembled modern day terrorists, modern day even modern day terrorists who attack, in this one for a political purpose. This time in this one, as we all know, again, spoilers, that Nightcrawler was doing it against his will, set up by Stryker. And I think that it was such a brilliant actiony set piece too. Again, really highlighting Nightcrawler's ability. Nightcrawler's one of the cooler characters, in my opinion, one of the more interesting characters from the X-Men universe, and I'm glad he was able to get such a big showcase in this movie. I wish they would have brought him back for X3, of course, but we'll get into X3. Don't worry. Again, the story setting up plus the attack on the school was really well done, with Hugh Jackman or Wolverine getting to really stab people, and that's what everybody wanted at that time. That was so cool. I remember I loved that as a kid. I always wanted to play Wolverine. Not that I really wanted to stab people, but just seeing him actually just kick ass, and it was just such a cool action movies. And I know hearing some of the background now from Bryan Singer's commentaries and things all these years later is that he knew he was trying to balance it. He allowed Wolverine to take vengeance on the Stryker and his men. Those people are the evil people, but they tried not to show as many people being innocent victims of the X-Men, which I know a lot of people have done retro videos, comedy videos of nitpicking and going through and saying, oh, if Storm created all, like the scene where she creates the tornadoes to avoid the airplanes or the U.S. fighter jets that were trying to stop the X-Jet, people down below would be injured and killed. And yeah, that's true. And there's an argument there, but when you start making arguments like that, you just start losing me personally, because I don't go to the movies to have reality shoved at me. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't expect to have senseless, just mindless violence thrown at me and just accept people being killed. It's just, if it's kind of an out of sight, out of mind thing. And it's a different example of, say, Man of Steel, where they are in Metropolis and they're smashing through all those buildings, and you just have to eventually wonder, okay, there have to be people in those buildings, and this is like, it's bordering on mass murder. But that's a whole nother topic. As for these movies, I think it works. You can nitpick some of the conveniences of the plot, but what movie do we know that doesn't have conveniences? I just think these, again, I mentioned it in my first video, I just love the X-Men world, the X-Men lore, the characters that are created. This movie was actually somewhat based on a graphic novel, which is really good. I highly recommend it. It's X-Men God Loves, Man Kills. It's very different. It's slightly different. It's pretty different, I guess I should say. The character of Stryker is actually a preacher in that one, and he's preaching against the mutant people. And it's just a really good read. I don't really want to spoil that, because a lot of people may not have read it. That one came out, I believe, in the late 80s, maybe early 90s, but it's I want to say late 80s. It's a really good read though. God Loves, Man Kills, X-Men graphic novel by Chris Claremont. Just highly recommend it. As far as this movie goes, continuing action, that you can tell their budget was increased, so their visuals are much better. Again, the opening with Nightcrawler alone, very very well done, and you also see the short set pieces showing Nightcrawler living in the church, his religious background. I thought his attention to his character design, his makeup design was really interesting. He has all those tattoos, one for every sin, and you see better. Just more, again, little changes that they were able to improve on from the first movie. Storm's wig, or Halle Berry's wig, is a little better than normal. Famke Janssen really plays Jean Grey well, as her character's getting a little more unstable with her powers, and she can't really control it. You can tell something's off. And of course, we have Professor Xavier. The scene in the beginning where and towards the end, where they have all these characters freeze, they were all used with most of them were professional mimes. That is really interesting to know, and the scenes come off really well. But in the food court with the more teenage characters, and that dynamic was really good. Aaron Stanford comes into the cast. He plays Pyro. It's another interesting addition to the cast, where you see his dilemma, and by the end, Magneto sways him over to his side because he sees the violence that people have, or contempt that they have for mutants, and how quickly they're met with that violence. As we see, the sequence at Bobby Drake's house is one of my favorites in the movie now going forward. It's more of a before the action. I mean, the action's good with Pyro, don't get me wrong, but with just the again showing that X-Men lore, that allegory and metaphor for Bobby Drake, in a sense, coming out to his parents as a mutant, which resembles other cases where people have to come out to their parents. I just think it makes this world so relatable on very many levels. And you can be, and again, I'll probably say this again, but I think for me, the biggest thing that draws me to it is because all of us, or why I think it's so appealing, and one of the better properties is because I think all of us feel like outsiders at some point, whether it be because of our skin color or our sexual orientation or even our hobbies, our interests. Some of us, some of us have interests that other people can't relate to, and maybe growing up in certain communities, maybe you can't always show that interest, or you can't always do that. And so again, I think that's a big part of it. Again, everybody in some sense of their life has usually felt like an outsider. Or maybe it's just your social circle. Maybe there's just so many ways to look at it. I think it's so layered, and it's just so interesting to see and experience. I thought Brian Cox playing William Stryker, interesting. The tie-in with Wolverine's story was necessary. This is where they obviously started the wheels turning of making, because Hugh Jackman was just absolutely skyrocketed to popularity, that they made this more of a Wolverine franchise than a true X-Men franchise. But it was fine. I mean, I wish, maybe in hindsight, they would have picked a villain that maybe wasn't so much connected to Wolverine, because it just was kind of convenient that he happens to be the big bad, but he also happens to solve all the riddles or some of the answers to Wolverine's character history. But that's fine. It doesn't, as you watch the movie, it doesn't really pop out. I'm just looking at it purely from an outside perspective, or I just kind of thought about it afterward seeing it. I mentioned Alan Cumming. Nightcrawler's awesome. I think I thought the reveal at the end, the decision to kill off Jean Grey, was a good decision. I know a lot of people nitpick the final scene with Iceman and Storm also being able to freeze the water, and Singer, his commentary track says that it was because of his idea was that there's just so much water that they couldn't do it. So I will say they probably could have added a through line, or maybe had someone say that, have someone try to do it, or show maybe there's a limit to Iceman. Maybe he can't freeze things from, he has to be down, he has to actually touch it, or he has to be there. I'm not, they could have come up with something. They had Nightcrawler try to get her, but he wasn't allowed to because of Jean was keeping him away. And the whole sequence there with Alki Lake, I thought that was really well done. Really good set design, and we see more of an expansion of the universe, which I think is a good way to judge sequels. Do they expand the universe? Do they introduce new characters? Do they build upon? Does the story, is it necessary to happen? Do we need to have this? And in a way we do. We have government intervention. We have this person who wants to solve the mutant problem. You see his background, Stryker I'm talking about, with his son and his experience with Xavier, and that's told to us, and we know where he's coming from, and we know why we're supposed to not like him and where they're coming from. I think it just tells a great story. And I think this is definitely on the higher ups of one of the X-Men movie franchise. I would put it up probably, for me, just off it would probably be number 3. I would probably put it in my top 3. The other ones will be coming down the line, but I can't get over how good this movie was, and it still is. It holds up really well, even in 2020. And other than some, story nitpicks, some ins and outs, maybe, or like I said, that final scene, nitpicks of logic, I guess, is what I think of it. It's sometimes there's just limits. Again, movie, it's kind of the same thing. I know, it's when you watch an old Western, it's like, not that if any of you have watched, there are times where in the movie Stagecoach, they always wondered why, if the Indians chased the stagecoach, why didn't they just shoot the horses? Well, and the director of that movie said, well, because if they do that, the movie would be over right there. And sometimes that happens in movies. I'm saying you can perfectly, that's logical. I don't know the answer. And again, Singer hasn't had an answer on his commentary, but he could have maybe done a little more in the movie to justify why Jean was unsavable. But also, it's just an act of sacrifice, I think. And that is a pretty good homage to the character in the comics. That's ultimately Jean in the Dark Phoenix saga. She makes a sacrifice And for those that don't know the story, which I do recommend, I'm not going to tell you how you get to that story or what that means, but you should read the Dark Phoenix Saga, again, by Chris Claremont and John Byrne. I mean, it's a great story arc. It's been repackaged as a graphic novel. I highly recommend that as well. And we'll get into that a little more as we talk about the next movie in the series. But yeah, there's just kind of my shooting from the hip thoughts on X-Men 2. I really think the direction is good by Singer. I thought the sets were good. I think the action is much better than the first movie. The first movie kind of was strained by a lower budget, so the action was kind of low key. And they have much better characters. You have a much better dynamic a more interesting dynamic now, because we have Magneto, who is always the bad guy, but he's able to unite with the X-Men, at least for 20 minutes of the movie, and we get to kind of have him and Mystique on our side and see what they're like to have on the team. So I think this movie did a lot for the X-Men franchise. Expanded the universe, expanded the adventure, gave another fun entry, good character development too. And by the end, we see the characters Rogue and Iceman have donned their leather suits. Those leather suits, I'm still not a fan, but they're there, and they managed to graduate, and they're part of the team now. And so we'll have a lot to talk about, trust me, on the other side when we get into X3, The Last Stand. That movie, that is going to be a different conversation. So I look forward to having it. For now, though, what did you guys think, or what do you think of X2, X-Men United? Did you see it in theaters? What did you think of it then? What do you think of it now? Does it still hold up for you? I think it does, and I think it's one of the better movies in the franchise. Where does it rank for you? Let me know down in the comments below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button and hit the like button too. That really helps, and also hit the bell icon. That way you'll get notified of all the future reviews to come in this X-Men review series that we're doing here on Movies and Beyond. So I can't wait until the next video, guys. Until then, take care.